Every year, Startup Grind hosts our SG Women Leaders Month, proudly recognizing the accomplishments of successful women leaders all over the world. These women are founders, venture capitalists, engineers, executives, educators, and more who represent our community all around the world. This month's SG Women Month is proudly presented by Google for Startups and Silicon Valley Bank.
All right, everybody. I hope everyone is having a great Thursday. I'm Curtis Berg. I am the director of Startup Grind Singapore. Hope everyone is settling in. We had a nice little video intro there. Today, we're going to be talking with Minette Navarrete and Joan Yao from Kickstart Ventures. Minette and Joan are there. How are you guys?
All good, thank you.
Doing well, Curtis.
Coming back to out of quarantine.
Right. Yeah. It's and you guys are joining us from Manila right now, so you guys are out of quarantine as well too, right?
Yes. Kind of.
Awesome. Just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors and partners. Silicon Valley Bank and Google for Startups, as you saw in the video there, are sponsoring SG Women's Month. Also in Singapore, when we do our in-person events, which we hope to be able to get back to doing soon, the company at Odeon Towers, Singha Beer and Grain are all some of the partners that we work with. And this event is pretty much truly global. We've worked with the chapters in Paris, Chengdu, and Cebu to actually help promote this. So we want to give a big shout out to our friends over there. Just some quick housekeeping items. We will do Q&A at the end of this session. So I know you guys on Zoom, if you're familiar with doing Zoom webinars and everything, there is a Q&A function at the bottom. But what we like to do at Startup Grind is you can just raise your hand and I should be able to unmute everybody. And that way you can actually ask your questions directly to Minette and Joan. So that way it's still very interactive, just like the typical fireside chats that we do when we're all in person, just a little bit different since we're all scattered around the world right now. And for those of you that don't know, I'm in Boston actually, where I got stuck when this pandemic broke out. So why don't we first just dive right into it? Minette and Joan, maybe tell us, give us a basic and brief overview of Kickstart Ventures, and what you guys do in your history, just so people can get familiar with it.
I can kick off with that. Kickstart is the corporate venture capital firm of Globe Telecom, the leading mobile operator in the Philippines. We're an 8-year-old company. We started in 2012, and when we started, like many corporates, we started out as an incubator, doing kind of programs for seed stage startups. In 2015, we received approval to start to do venture capital. And so we transitioned out of our incubation activities. Today, we run about $60 million into funds. And we are just about to launch our third fund, this time with a wider roster of limited partners, encompassing the Ayala Corporation. And so we are looking forward to this third fund of maybe $150, $180 million.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys about. You know, you're making a pretty big leap from the first two funds, just in terms of size, to this much larger one. It's going to make you one of the larger VC firms in the region. When, you know, typical VC firms, they have LPs, they might have a lot of people that have gone into the fund, but you guys are a corporate venture capital firm coming out of Globe Telecom. How is it different in the way a CVC firm operates like yours and a traditional VC firm in terms of what they want to see on returns and investments, or just in terms of investment philosophy and you know, how they interact with you guys on a regular basis?
Joanne, you want to start?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. You know, I think they always ask with CVCs, right, where you lie on the spectrum between financial and strategic returns. And the answer, of course, for most CVCs is that it's both. So I think, at Kickstart, we have metrics that hold us to account around capital deployment and ROI. But we also have metrics that hold us to account on strategic introductions, commercial deals and partnerships that we close, etc. So at Kickstart, our tagline, or what we say that we do, is we do two things. We break down barriers and we build bridges, right? So on the investment team, we seek to identify and present opportunities that kind of are on the horizon, that are peripheral or adjacent to the core businesses. And we seek to identify the trends that emerge, and present these to the leaders, at Globe and at Ayala, so that they stay apprised and aware of what's going on. And if we have high conviction in these companies, we make investments into them. We also have a portfolio operations team that works to create kind of strategic value post-investment. So we have a BD team that seeks to build relationships and synergies between our portfolio companies and the business units at Ayala. And even beyond that, like different companies in the Philippines as well. Annette, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I thought that was a pretty good capture. I mean, we look at ourselves as bringing investment value as well as post-investment value, as Joanne has said. And I think especially in times like these, where there's quite a lot of disruption and uncertainty, both economically as well as in terms of tech, we find that the ability to bring the resources of corporations to bear, whether that's to help in distribution, to boost the marketing, to bring, its established customers, is a good way to do venture capital investments, and different maybe from pure financial investors. So it's a good partnership. I think we co-invest with a lot of pure financial investors, and we find that we are able to find a really good rhythm of collaboration.
Right. And, Joan, you touched on the parent company doing investments in spaces that complement either existing companies in the portfolio, but also the parent company. In terms of corporate venture capital, for a lot of people that aren't familiar with it, is that one of the key things that kind of guides your investing principle, or is it just one of the things that's in the background that you try to complement if it happens? In other words, if you see a great opportunity, do you just go for it even if it doesn't have complementary value to the parent corporation like Globe or Ayala?
Yeah, no, I think the question is always like kind of the time horizon, right? So it could be something that today, because of the priorities of a particular business unit or the group, a company that we have high conviction on, it's not yet time for them to work with one of our business units. I find in the 4 years that I've been at Kickstart is that there are deals that we do because we see that is kind of on the horizon. That is how consumers' habits are changing in other parts of the world, or this is technology that could really disrupt how particular business process is done, or just how transactions are fulfilled. And so yes, we will make that bet. We will introduce them right away to the business units that we think it could be relevant for. But what we do is we open the door and we encourage that conversation to be had. Sometimes a partnership happens right away. Sometimes it takes 6 months or 12 months. But when we invest, there is value that we see and synergy that we see. But the time horizon for when it's ultimately realized can vary.
That's great. And I want to switch over in terms of, just how much work you guys do on the back end of making deals. A lot of people, depending on the VC firm and their philosophy and the size of it, if it's, a much smaller one with just maybe a few people running it, the follow-on support that you provide to companies after that investment is made. You know, one of the things when we talked the other week was, you know, your post-investment team and your pre-investment team is kind of almost the same size. So what are some of the things that you guys do to help startups after that investment round is made?
So we have a great process around handovers. And one of the key conversations we have is what we call the wish list conversation, which is how we have a conversation with founders around what they're after, when they take money from corporate venture capital. We find that frequently they have a clear view about what they're after, whether it's they want specific introductions or they have a view about becoming a partner, let's say for distribution, for productization. So it's the culture at Kickstart is very deliberate and very open. We have all these conversations, so we like things that are direct and clear. And to have those conversations early means that we can set expectations and work to a plan together. It also means that we can be clear about the support that we can offer, whether it's in terms of business development or community engagement or communications. So the portfolio operations team will work to those and will build mentor relationships as well, so that we can run webinars and one-on-one coaching clinics with specific mentors.
Yeah, I guess also, you know, one last point is, you know, we also like to organize. We did it more, of course, pre-pandemic, but we have this thing called Founders Breakfast, for example. You know, where founders can kind of on a quarterly basis, everyone gets together. You know, they talk, they socialize. Sometimes, you know, we give a chat or a talk at the end of the event, but really the purpose is for founders to be able to connect and build relationships amongst each other as well.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, you know, just the effect that COVID is having. You know, we talked to Elevate VC in our last startup round event last month, and Remy was making the point that, you know, deal flow it takes a little bit longer now because you can't go and actually meet and see these founders face to face, and face to face is such a large component when you're doing investments. How has COVID impacted your not only investment philosophy and strategy, but also just the entire process from, you know, evaluating potential investment opportunities to closing out the actual investments?
Yeah, I guess I can speak to process a little bit, and maybe Minette can come in with kind of also, you know, how like our strategy and what we look for is changing. You know, I think on kind of the investment process side, we've been quite lucky actually that our work hasn't been super affected. In fact, sometimes I feel like there's more work in kind of this pandemic environment. We've been very lucky that pipeline has not slowed down at all. We continue to see you know, very strong deal flow, and in fact, kind of since the pandemic hit, we've managed to close our 44th investment, and fingers crossed, knock on wood, you know, we'll also be closing a 45th one soon. So I think in terms of what it's meant for us, certainly for everyone participating in this chat, you know, it's just so many more Zoom calls. I think apart from the direct interaction with founders, we do try to work with our co-investors more closely. You know, so generally, you know, we will look at deals that come referred by people that we know, by people who have worked with those founders or those teams before and have kind of longer and deeper knowledge of those personalities, and can speak to integrity and things like that. Because in a way, when you do due diligence, right, you're sitting in a room for 8 hours, 10 hours, having meals with people, and that tells you a lot. And certainly in the absence of that during COVID, you're looking for kind of proxy data. So I find that we do speak more with co-investors. We do speak more with mentors and people who have worked with these people for a long time, to try to get a better understanding of the personalities of these people, what they're like to work with, whether they listen. We also do more like reference calls as well, speak to customers, and try to get kind of as close to the ground as we can without actually being on the ground.
Yeah, I think the process has to change. I think we all know that if you think about this year, there are going to be quite few trips, and for Kickstart in particular, we're pretty intense
Yeah.
in engaging. We believe in the founders, and the fact that we can't do the face to face means we need to look at other indicators of character, of integrity, of vision, of ambition. Um, and I think that doesn't change. I think we find a better process that works. I think the other thing that perhaps we ask ourselves frequently is, from a strategic point of view, are we looking at structural changes in industries? Are there trends that have changed materially and that are going to persist? And that's how we look at what might be great opportunities for investment. So, we look at our existing portfolio, and while a number of companies have obviously suffered from the disruption, we also have a number of companies that are thriving, that are doing very, very well. And that's really helpful. So we look at where the opportunities are, we coach and support. And our belief is, we certainly will keep investing through the
Mm,
pandemic.
yeah. I think COVID has highlighted the need to embrace digital here in the Philippines. I think, and there's that meme, obviously, very well used. It came out like a month after all this happened, right? What accelerated digital transformation the most, and pretty much it's been this pandemic. That is very true. I think, and it has affected all businesses, large and small. And all companies are looking for ways to keep their businesses running during this time. How do I still make sales if nobody's coming to the malls? How do I meet production targets if half my workforce can't come to work? How do I file my taxes? There are all these issues now that have come up. And I think in those issues, there are opportunities. So I think the pandemic for me has brought to light new problems, and perhaps problems that were always there but have now become more critical to solve. So I think new solutions and new startups are going to be formed during this time, because you can't wait or just put up with it, any longer. Yeah.
Yeah, and one question I wanted to ask was, in terms of just what you're advising your portfolio companies in doing to adjust to the new normal, so to speak. How involved and proactive are you guys in terms of going to them and saying, this is now going to be an issue for you, you need to think about X, Y, and Z? And how many of them have actually come to you for help, and without you having to actually prompt them, but have come and said, we don't know what to do right now, can you give us some advice?
I think what's worked for us is that we have always been quite involved with the portfolio companies. We have regular business updates. And when the pandemic hit, one thing we did differently as Kickstart was to say, we are going to accelerate and intensify these discussions. We are going to have them more frequently. I think the response time varies depending on whether you've got founders who have been through crises before, or people for whom this is maybe their first time. And we've found that the founders who had had previous experience going through a crisis have responded more quickly and more significantly. So I know from experience, I was running companies when there was the Asian crisis, when there was 9/11, the dot-com bust, the global financial crisis. So there's a playbook of things that you do to secure a company, to conserve cash, secure your talent, make sure your people are all right, that they are healthy and safe. Um, and then you begin to cut down costs and you begin to understand where the opportunities. Um, we had one IC meeting where we had a director say, you know, the pivots that are happening are amazing. And it's true. You have a look at what's going on out there and you realize that in a time of crisis, the more seasoned leaders in the startups have very quickly understood how to improve their margins, monetize opportunities, shift, and that's been quite a boon. So you see very different reactions. In many cases, we reached out first, but that was because we had deliberately set out to do that. And again, that's because we have a portfolio ops team.
Yeah, very true. I guess we with different companies, depending on their stage, the needs are different, and therefore the asks are different as well. So we've had companies that say, listen, I think my cash is, my runway is only like, the next few months, and so we'll go in and work with them and review the cash flow, and discuss where adjustments might be made. Can you break the lease, or do these sorts of things to
Yeah.
conserve cash, as Minette was saying. um, we have other companies that need a bridge round. They need bridge financing, and where we've been able to, we've stepped in also, to structure those rounds for them, or with other co-investors. um, those are kind of some examples, I think, of how we've stepped in.
Right. Is there, without talking about anybody specifically, but just generally speaking, is there any investments or companies out there that you talked about that pivot that they were making, and some of them did it very naturally. Like we had Kevon Chung from Toasty a couple of weeks ago, and they were just doing in-person events, audience engagement and working together to put people together. And they went completely online to do online networking. And he was like, we don't think we'll go back. This is going to be the core of our business. But is there anybody that, in your portfolio or companies, or generally speaking, that you came across that just was, felt completely lost and flat-footed in terms of not having to how to respond to this crisis?
I think there are maybe a couple of businesses where it's not so much the specific startup, but the industry
Right.
just takes a significant downturn. So that's happened as well.
Right. Yeah, and there's, Airbnb, I was watching Bloomberg the other day, Airbnb, they had the CEO on, and they were talking about, the travel and hospitality space is just getting, completely clobbered right now. And, Brian was talking about, just the adjustments and everything that they actually have to make. I want to pivot right now, and we'll do Q&A in probably 5 or 10 minutes. I see one hand has gone up. So if you guys have a question that you want to ask, just put your hand up, raise your hand. Don't use the Q&A function on Zoom, because we're going to actually make this interactive. But if you have a question, do put your hand up right now, and I'll go through that. So Amanda, I see Amanda's already got a question there, so just hang on to that. But I want to talk, since it is SG Women's Month, and we are highlighting female leaders all over the world. You guys are a really interesting and cool firm, because your gender diversity across your ranks is pretty unique. And for most people, they don't know, if they don't know this, that about 9-10% females in venture capital, it's still very much a man's world. So how has it worked for you guys in terms of bringing that gender diversity? And I know Nas Daly came and did a video with you guys on it, but what's some wisdom that you can impart, since you guys are a very diverse, gender diverse firm?
I think to be honest, it starts with the fact that we are pretty conscious of the meritocracy. As we said in that video with Nas, we recruit the people who fit the job, and if all things are equal, then you go for you choose a vector, and that vector is never gender. You choose a vector that maybe it's availability, maybe it's a different network. One of the things I've liked for forming a company, and I talk about this a lot, is looking for spiky talent, people who have crazy skill at particular things, and we're happy to take those spikes, because that's what gives us the opportunity for brilliance and for outsized results. So for us, that's quite an easy thing, I guess. I didn't think, Joanne, when you came and joined us, were you conscious of any sort of gender issues coming in?
No, not at all. I mean, I guess I've and we've talked about this, Minette, that I've always been very fortunate, I think, to be part of firms and in my career, where there were always kind of strong women leaders, like at the helm or at the leadership level, and maybe that's part of it, right? I think that when you have kind of women in leadership positions, then it doesn't become an issue, because they then don't see kind of through I must only hire men goggles or whatever it is, right? I don't know if there's the issue of gender bias is kind of more where there aren't any women to begin with.
Yeah, I think for us, there was a time where the guys were complaining and saying, "You've got to hire guys."
They were like down to 2. No, and then it was just 1 for a while.
Yeah, for a while we had one guy in the company. But also I remember, so at the point where we were expanding quite quickly and we didn't have space, and therefore Joanne and I had to sort of sit 2 feet apart, like in the pantry, company pantry. And at some point we were discussing something, and we started to say, share poetry. And one of the guys passed by and said, "Oh my God, now I know how it feels to be a girl when guys talk, football results." Because just to pass by and have the 2 girls discussing poetry of all things. But I think it's very achievable, if you're genuinely keen to learn and bring diversity, not just gender diversity, but really, a diversity of skills and points of view,
backgrounds, thoughts. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's, it's pretty interesting, the statistics that we see all around the world, number of women in VC leadership positions. Boardroom diversity is something that's been measured across the world. And there's been research that's been done about having, a more diverse board, not just amongst gender, but also culturally as well. And nationalities, that the performance of the company, the stock performance is actually better in some cases. What do you think the VC community can do to help boost, gender diversity in firms, and also get more women in the upper ranks of VC management?
I think one thing is giving chances for women to take a shot. I think men and women present differently, um, and it takes thought and mindfulness to find the leadership that is fit for purpose. And sometimes what everybody thinks is the right choice is not necessarily the right choice. So to not go for the obvious things, I think makes a big difference in creating opportunities at the leadership position.
Joan, anything to add?
Nothing to add. I think that was a pretty good answer.
Pretty good. Spot on.
Glad you approve.
In terms of the startups that you invest in, I'm just curious of the kind of those 45 investments that you did, how many of them are, led by female entrepreneurs and how many are led by male entrepreneurs? Is there a pretty even split, or, just what are you guys seeing there in terms of the companies that you invest in?
Hold on, I'm pulling it up. No, all right. I think so. On the management side, it's pretty good. Like we've got 65% of our teams today have leadership. Have females at the leadership level. On the founder side, it's perhaps not as good. We've got about that's not too bad. It's teams with female founders about 40%. So still a little bit skewed male, but 60-40 ish. Hello.
60-40 split. Go ahead, Minette.
Yeah.
I think some of that also is certainly amongst the local founders. There's a little bit of self-selection. I remember these are dated stats, but when Joanna and I started to look at the numbers, it was something like maybe 11% of the pitches to Kickstart had a female founder. We ended up, and we would invest in about, of the teams that we actually invested in, maybe 25-30% had a female founder. But that was a disproportionate increase already versus the pitches that we were receiving.
Right. Just want to talk a little bit more about, because there really isn't a playbook. I'm helping a company fundraise right now. When you talk to founders and other people within the startup grind community that have fundraised, it's like, so how did you do it? And everyone seems to have a common thread, which is there really isn't like a guidebook on how to go about and do fundraising, how to figure out how much money that you need to raise, the right amount, how to approach VC firms and whatnot. So I want to just spend a little bit of time on this because this is pretty valuable for our community, I think. When companies are going out there trying to figure out if they should fundraise and what the amount is, what's the advice that you would give to them when making that decision?
So if they should fundraise, meaning they don't necessarily have to?
If they're tossing it around in their mind, in terms of, do we need to go out and raise funds right now? Should we do a seed round? Let's say. So hypothetically, let me give an example. Let's say the company has bootstrapped it for a year, and they're saying, I'm not sure. Should we go out and do fundraising right now? How would they go about making that decision, or what's the advice that you would give to them when answering that question?
Yeah, I can take a crack at it first, and I'm sure Minette will have her thoughts as well. No, I mean, I think the first thing is like, why are you fundraising, right? Like, are you fundraising because assuming you've been bootstrapping it for a year, what are your reasons for belief, right, that this is worth pursuing and raising money for, right? So there's this thing I draw for our founders from time to time about fundraising, right? Is that, if you raise $500,000 at a $2 million valuation or whatever it is, the person who invests at 2.5 million will be looking, for you to sell your company at 10. If a person invests at a 10 million valuation, they'll be looking for you to sell it at 50. If you raise 50 million, maybe they'll be looking for you to sell it at 250, right? So with each round of fundraising, with each round of fundraising, the valuation expectations and exit expectations for you as a founder increase. So, I think for me, it's like, as you set out on that journey, as you take that first step into fundraising, you're like, okay, where's this going to get me to? What do I expect kind of to be on the other side of raising this money, in terms of product milestones, in terms of revenue milestones, and being able to answer that question, number one, enables you to have a conversation with your potential investor today, but also, it gives you something to work for, in that, okay, if I hit XYZ milestones 12 to 18 months from now, then I can have a conversation with, for example, a Series A investor. So I think, kind of, you got to really know what you're raising for, what your reasons are for doing it, and what the next milestones would be for you to say, all right, let's keep going. And for an investor at that next round to agree and say, yeah, let's keep going, I'll fund that, right?
Yeah, I think as you say, because there is no playbook, it's important to try and learn as much as you can from people who have gone down that path. So at Kickstart, for example, we had one of the founders, JP Ellis from C88 out of Indonesia. He raised a Series C, and just a few weeks after he had raised a C, he was in front of the other founders in our portfolio, sharing his experience, coaching them, telling them, here's what makes an A different from a B, different from a C. Here are the questions you're going to have to answer. These are the things you need to prepare for. Alan Lau of Wattpad in Canada had raised a Series D. And when he had the opportunity to come and talk to the other founders in the portfolio, he did the same thing. He talked them through what his experiences were, how he grew his company to have, over 70 million customers in the community. So as much as you can learn from everyone else, these circles of trust create opportunity for people to better prepare themselves. Fundraising is never easy, never fun. And you have to be very clear, as Joanne says, for why you're doing it, why you want to do it. Sometimes, frequently, it's to get the capital to grow the business or grow it faster. But sometimes you take money in because you want a particular person, company, firm to be on your cap table because it helps lend credibility, or it improves the quality of thought in your company's board. So the big existential questions we find are useful to have in the beginning rather than later on when you're neck deep in the numbers and the pitching for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess somebody needs to put the fun back in fundraising, to make make the process a little bit more fun. You guys can use that if you do a fireside chat with your portfolio companies, how to put the fun back in fundraising, or maybe we can do an event on that. But the three funds that you have, the first one, you kind of go after those pre-Series A companies, smaller check sizes. The second fund is that post-Series A, and then the third one that you're about to launch is going to be in that A to C range. Do you find that, for the entrepreneurs out there that are listening right now, that the fundraising rounds, the various rounds that they go through, they're not, the questions that need to be asked and the philosophy of how much to raise and everything, how much does it change from each round to round? You know, in other words, a founder looking at raising a seed round of money versus a C or D round, how much does their philosophy need to change along that journey?
Wow, that's a big question. No, I mean, again, I'll take a crack at it. But you know, I think when I think about the series, like, you know, seed A, B, C, um, one thing that you're trying to measure, right? I think two things. You're trying to measure the maturity of product market fit and commercialization, right? And then also kind of secondly, you're trying to measure the maturity of the organization and the capabilities and capacities of the organization. So, you know, one is, I guess, more external, and the other one is kind of more internal. But they're both interrelated, right? So, kind of, you know, at the seed round, you know, you'd expect, let's say, you know, at least like very strong founding team. You know, if not yet a second line, at least like a second line of very hardworking, like associate level types. You know, and some commercial validation, right? Some reason for belief that, hey, this could be really big, and then, or substantial. At the A, you know, they start, like, investors start to expect a stronger product market fit, you know, a hastening, kind of a more formulaic way of closing deals. That's not always achieved at the A. Sometimes that does roll into a B. You know, but again, it's kind of about the replicability of that business model over time. And I guess kind of on the internal side, on the organizational capability side, with every round, you're kind of trying to bolster the capacity of your team, right? So at around A, you know, maybe you'll start building kind of at least, you know, VP levels, you know, maybe at B or C, you'll start hiring like kind of more C levels and stuff. You know, so because this is all kind of on a journey to become not a startup anymore. It's to become a going concern, something that can list or something that can sell. So yeah, that's, I guess, my view.
You did a good job answering it. I know it was a pretty big question, but you know, I think it's pretty good for entrepreneurs and startups to be conscious that, you know, your mindset it's not, oh, I'm raising funds again. It's your mindset in a seed round is very, very different from, you know, a C or a D round. You know, the company could have changed quite significantly, but, you know, entrepreneurs can't really approach it as, oh, I'm out raising money again. You know, they can't make the same sort of, you know, pitch to investors or style of pitch even at a C round or a B round than they did at a seed round. So, yeah, so I think that's pretty good insights there. I see Ida's got a question. We'll jump to Q&A right now. Ida, I'm going to unmute you and I'll leave you unmuted for the remainder of the question, so you can engage Minette and Joan, but you're on with Minette and Joan right now.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. All right, thank you for very good presentations. Super interesting. And so I have one question which relates to, I guess it is a gender question, you could say. So thinking about the financial industry and particularly for VCs, but this also relates to entrepreneurs and startups, running or entering leadership roles in these industries and in startups is heavy workload, right? And what we know today from research is that childcare is a number one key reason for gender inequality, and because women are still the primary caretaker in almost all countries around in the world. So I would like to hear your perspectives from the inside of this industry, if this is something that you have actively worked on in company policy to kind of facilitate that process for enabling women to take on leadership roles, with that still kind of big issue on the table with childcare, and what your sort of insights from the industry are on this here in this region.
So maybe in running our own firm, so Kickstart Ventures, I think certainly for myself, I think people perform better if they are confident that their home life is stable and secure. So it isn't, and forgive me, it's not a gender thing for us. We do try and make concessions. We offer a lot of flexibility. So somebody who's a Kickstart team member who says, I need to take a half day off because it's my daughter's birthday and I've got to spend the afternoon baking her cake and making cookies. She gets that flexibility. Same as a guy who says, I've got to stay home because the roof repairman is coming and it's my job to take care of that. And both things have happened. I think from a company perspective, it's important for us to recognize that in today's families, the roles and the ability to contribute to family life needs to be respected. And so we offer flexibility both ways. We have the good fortune of being able to offer that sort of flexibility. So from that perspective, I think we certainly have policies in place that make it possible for people to balance, whether it's parenting or being a good partner, with being a strong professional.
I don't have much to add, but I think one thing also I would say is, Minette, if I can speak about Minette, like she's not here, but, like Minette kind of, was in a position of leadership and responsibility, when she was raising her son. And I think, there were a lot of demands in that job that she managed alongside, raising a fine young man. But I think the knowledge, like I was speaking for a minute, but like, the knowledge that she was able to do that, I think, it makes it, I suppose, in some ways less of a question whether any other woman would be able to do that, in a similar situation. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like sometimes it's that, if a guy asks about it, it's just like, he's like, I don't know, like, maybe it's hard. It is hard. But Minette, I'll let you speak now.
No, I think it's true. It is hard, but certainly today, right? The men are expected to do their share of parenting as well. So we have a colleague who routinely will say, I've got to leave early. There's a violin recital that I've got to be at. Or it's, I've got to go home because my wife is traveling for work and I'm going home. We're going to do barbecue with the boys. So I think it's important for people to come to work as a whole person, to bring out what they are doing both at home. And because we have the ability for extreme candor in Kickstart, it means that we're able to have the conversations without embarrassment, without needing to feel I've got to make excuses, I have to apologize that part of my life is being a parent. And I think that matters. I think we see that especially in how you can get great talent. Because the best talent will want a balanced life and will choose a company that honors everything that they are.
Yeah.
So I hope I did helpful.
Yeah, I think one last bit, I think, it's just that I think it really stems from kind of a fundamental belief in like the capability of people, like regardless of, gender and, all the things that you got to believe that people can do it. And then you look at how you can empower them. And I actually feel like in startups, at least many of the startups that we work with here in the Philippines, they're the most open, or like not flexible exactly, but they do kind of um, uh, yeah, they create a more enabling environment, I suppose. For different lifestyles and people to fulfill their responsibilities.
Thank you for your answers.
Sure.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
I see Curtis is on mute.
Thanks. I sorry about that. Thanks, Ida, for that question. We're going to go right now to Win Chris with a question. So, Win Chris, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Hi.
Hi, Win.
On this call today. My question would be, I'm sort of new in the sort of OTT and the media content world, and I've been studying for Philippines and Indonesia, and I would love to hear your views on sort of the OTT platforms in Philippines. And it seems to me the likes of Netflix and iFlix is most popular. And again, please correct me, and I'm happy to hear your views in terms of which are the sort of the emerging platforms, and when I mean platforms, would be the local platforms, basically created, designed, and especially for Filipinos. I've seen a lot more, I would say, in Indonesia, but I'm particularly interested in learning from both of you on the OTT platforms and in the local market.
Joanne.
Oh, okay. It's me. Hello. Hi, Win. Yeah, no. So, I think the first thing is, and you've where are you based? Do you travel to the Philippines much?
I'm based in Singapore, and
Nice.
I've just recently started looking at the Philippines. I used to go there a lot in 2010, and times have changed. So that's why I think learning from the both of you really makes a big difference.
All right, I'll give you an update. I mean, listen, I think the first thing is that Philippines is kind of Facebook nation. I think if you talk about kind of how Filipinos consume content, there's a lot of Filipinos still on Facebook, which has its good and bad sides, as you will read. I think YouTube also a very popular channel. Minette is very humbly, but I think she's like the queen of OTT, right? Like started it way back when. But I think through actually partnerships with telcos like Globe, companies like Spotify, companies like Netflix have managed to carve out quite a significant kind of niche for themselves, which has only grown, mind you, with the recent pandemic, and I think the desire for more on-demand content. Even the local networks such as ABS-CBN also have kind of an OTT app, right, where people can access shows online as well. We are very proud. That's why Mina and I gave each other a look. When you asked about local platforms, actually our 43rd investment was in a company called Kumu. That's spelled Kumu, and it's a popular, fast-growing live streaming app here in the Philippines. And that one I think we're quite excited about. I think those are kind of the big names I want to mention. Minette, I don't know if there are others I might have missed.
Well, Kumu's the one we want to talk about because we love them. But also, I guess when there are various things. So there are games. So before I joined Globe Telecom, I was running a startup actually doing online game publishing, and that captures quite a lot of engagement. There's a lot of identity and affiliation with there. But you are right. When you look at video platforms, certainly today, far and away, the on the we see a lot of TikTok, a lot of YouTube, um, and there are various ways of entering, and obviously these companies are on their own, accessible via the web. But content companies like Spotify, like Netflix, they've grown very fast because they have hit upon partnerships, specifically with Globe Telecom. Globe's quite good for helping customers go through the journey of from being non-user to a paying user, and that's helped the video platforms come around, whether it's overseas, whether it's foreign or local. But yeah, Kumu's the one we want to talk about because we love them. We're invested in them. They're growing fast.
That's great to hear. And my one last question is, esports is quite big, I would say, in the Philippines. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and does Kumu offer esports as well on its platform?
I think they're starting to explore it, and perhaps some live streamers have also started to be on Kumu. But actually, we also made an investment in a company called Yup.gg, which was founded by the ex MD for APAC of Twitch, as well as the head of former head of Singapore Skoga, and they have created a platform which connects gaming content creators to brands and advertisers to bring a lot more transparency and efficiency to the market. So we know that Filipinos are spending hours and hours of time. Usually now, I think it's done still mostly via Facebook and YouTube, as far as I'm aware. Consuming the gaming content. But brands know that these guys have a lot of engagement, but in terms of negotiating deals, in terms of what's the right structure, how much should you get paid, etc. And that's kind of what Yup tries to bring to the market, kind of making it a lot easier for brands and content creators to discover each other and transact.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you. Hope to see you in the Philippines when this is all over.
Yes,
Drop us a line.
Thanks, Wen. We're going to go to Zolbu right now. Zolbu, you're on with Annette and Joan.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
All right. Well, actually, I'm new to Startup Grind, and I'm starting a Startup Grind Ulaanbaatar chapter in Mongolia.
Oh, wow.
Cool. Are you coming to us from Ulaanbaatar?
Yes, I am.
Ah, great.
That is so cool.
And I have to say, Mongolia is, they handled the COVID response, the COVID crisis. They weren't hit very hard with it. So your country has done a very, very good job with the crisis that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, the government did a great job. We just had an election last night, and the party who were controlling the government back then in parliament has won the majority seat in the parliament. So I guess they proved themselves.
Cool.
Yeah. So my question is, I run a company called Start. We do venture builder and also ecosystem development in Mongolia. And as far as the investors go, we don't have very many angel investors and VCs in Mongolia. So with my friends, I started an angel investor association. And surprisingly, we have a lot of corporates coming up as members, and they're trying to be CVC, right? And I heard that you were talking about you're about to raise your third fund, and you also focus on the financials and also focus on the strategy, right? Strategical investments. So when you have outside investors investing into your fund as LPs, how do you balance those outside investors with your parent company or your strategical goal that you actually has maintained probably in your first, second, and third fund? And that's kind of seemed like quite interesting to me. And going forward, also that I mean, to my mind, many of the corporates in Mongolia, the group companies, even though they want to be CVC, they want to be the big deal, they need a lot of work in terms of dealing with startups and just like you said, working with the startups during hard times, providing them additional and alternative financings and stuff. And they need to learn this stuff. So they, in my mind, they should be LP first in CVCs like yours, get more hands-on experience and how you guys handle these situations, startups and different entrepreneurs and founders, right? And then they should probably be CVC on their own. And that's just my opinion. But my question is how I put it. So was my question clear?
Yeah.
Okay, great,
So,
thanks.
If I can give it back to you, one right is how do you manage external LPs? In a CVC fund that's trying to optimize or that's trying to hit both financial and strategic objectives. The short answer is this is not yet our problem because with the active fund. 100% of the funds come from the Ayala group of companies. So it's Ayala Corporation and the different business units inside of Ayala. However, in future funds, we may have external LPs. That is true. I think really whenever you're fundraising and communicating to LPs, managing to LPs, you have to be clear about the objectives, right? And the mandate, the guardrails. And so I think if we ever were to raise from external LPs, it's just kind of getting everyone on the same page about the objectives and targets and returns, right? That they should expect.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry, Joanne.
No, I was about to go to the next question. So you should, yes, please.
I was gonna say there is no shortcut. I think you do need to hold their hands and walk them through, and you realize that a lot of things that you learn in corporate life are the exact opposite of how you need to approach startup investing. So you look at stuff like being more generous, for example, or allowing for uncertainty, or
not owning the IP,
or not owning the IP, or seeking minority stakes. So one of the things that we had to go through in our first two funds was to take the money from the corporate and help them understand that this is very different. So corporates, they're trained to seek majority stake, try to drive down the price, extract as much value as they can, as early as they can. And we tell them this is the exact opposite. We want minority stake. We do not want control. We want the founders to exercise leadership in the company. We want them to have a lot of skin in the game, and we need to trust them. And all those things are not what the corporate DNA is about. So we wish you all the best. It's an exciting, interesting adventure. It's not easy, but it is so worth it when you can begin to see the corporates collaborate with startups in ways that they weren't doing in the beginning.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to talk about Minette like she's not here, but I think because Kickstart started in 2012, and frankly, I think even within Globe, Minette and Dan, the co-founders of Kickstart, we're exploring the concept of corporate venturing, even in the kind of mid 2000s, right? So I guess what I wanted to say is, Zolbu, you're not alone. Every ecosystem that where corporate VC is developing has to go through this. But there is a support network. We meet every. I'm just kidding, but I think that definitely do reach out, like to us and just to people who have gone through that journey, because it is a painful one, as Minette says sometimes, but it's worth it. I think that corporations offer an amazing platform for startups to reach scale more quickly than perhaps they otherwise would. But it's just about creating the ground rules, or just educating corporates about, here's the best way to work with a startup. Here's how you really create the most value over the long term, I guess.
Is that helpful?
Yes, it's definitely helpful, and thanks for the tip. And what's the best way to reach out to you guys, if especially for some of the questions that you guys, some of the things that you said, I just want to get like hands-on examples and share it with my members.
Very cool. You can message us at like collaborate@kickstart.ph. That's an easy one.
Okay, so I'll try that, and thank you very much, and it was very helpful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zobel, and welcome to the Startup Grind community as well. So thanks for coming today. I'm conscious of your time. There are 2 more questions. Do you guys have a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to go to Michelle. Just give me 1 second. Just got to find her. She typed her question in the Q&A, but I reached out to her and asked if she would like to get to you live. And Michelle, you're on with Minette and Joan.
Hi, Curtis. Hi, Minette. Hi, John. This is Michelle.
Hey.
Hi. Nice to
You
hear
look familiar.
Yeah. So, I'm Filipino. My co-founder is Indian. We're a seed stage startup based in Singapore, now expanding in Hyderabad, India. So my question goes back to gender, because here we are such a minority, right? Like, it's in a conference or in a room of startups. Probably you'd find like 5 women. So my question is, coming from the Philippines, where you have a lot of women, thriving, and with 40% of your portfolios having women in the founding team, did you observe any distinct strengths in the team dynamics, in the way they lead? And most especially, this is something that's very important to me now, is how they cultivate the culture of the startup.
Gosh. I think so. In the deal team, there's a third person aside from Joanne and myself. And he always says that typically the women are the ones who will do the diligent, detailed work, and can be relied upon to be meticulous. I'm not so certain that that is a gender thing. I think I've seen founders who care about culture, who care about the detailed work, equally, being men and women. So, Joanne, did you have a different view?
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and I don't know if I would say that kind of our teams with women kind of have let's say significantly outperform the teams where it's only guys. I will say that maybe there's a different energy when there are women kind of on the founding team or the leadership team. Yeah, I don't know. No kind of no specific things jump out to me, Michelle, at the moment, I must say.
And I guess that's a good thing.
I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, it should be a good thing.
Yeah. We can talk to you about the Kickstart team and how the girls and the guys are different.
I'm sold already. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
But thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle. We got one last question. We're gonna go to Bianca, who's gonna have the last question for today, and then we'll wrap it up. Bianca, you're on.
Thanks so much, Curtis. That's a lot of pressure. Hey, ladies, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to listen to you guys. So I'm Bianca. I'm half Filipino, half English, and I've actually just moved to Singapore with my husband. We're both kind of startup addicts, both having worked. He's founded a startup himself. And I've worked at a growth stage startup, mostly in EMEA. So we're really excited to be hopefully welcomed into the startup community in APAC. And I guess my question for yourselves, being half Pinoy myself, is it's a really interesting political climate we're finding ourselves in the Philippines. How do you see that impacting the investing ecosystem or investing environment? For yourselves, for example, in the Philippines?
I mean, I think essentially I was just talking earlier today, about like the Philippine startup ecosystem, and I know Minette has her thoughts about it as well. I actually think the kind of let's say the statements kind of of our president or the politics don't kind of get in kind of the way so much day to day. I think certainly what worries investors more, if anything, would be kind of the same things that worry investors anywhere, which is tax and regulatory. And ease of doing business, and on those fronts, the Philippines, could certainly improve in terms of transparency and speed. But I think what is really kind of needed, or what I think investors, when we speak to investors in Southeast Asia, what they're looking for. I think it's two things, right? It's either proof that there's a large enough market to sustain, a tech company that's worth at least hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, in the Philippines, right? Is the Philippine market big enough to sustain a Philippine unicorn, right? So, are there Philippine companies that will expand outside of the Philippines and kind of be able to create huge value in that way. So I think still investors' concerns are kind of more around this, the potential of the market, the ability of Philippine startups to scale up and thrive in markets outside of the Philippines, and then questions around ease of doing business, tax and regulatory. I think those more than the political climate are what are kind of foremost on investors' minds.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of political noise. I think for me, what as an investor, what I tend to look at is the policy environment. So are the policies in place to help startups thrive in the Philippines? Do we have a sophisticated enough financial system? Are the regulations and the regulators progressive enough that they're not going to kill innovation? So there's a whole slew of policy factors that matter. And I think those things are kind of what a number of the overseas investors will look at when they look at the Philippine startup. Obviously, there are a number of challenges around whether their investments will be secure in this market in companies that are incorporated here. But at the end of the day, when they look at the macroeconomics of the Philippines, and they look at the demographic sweet spot. They look at the growth rate. They look at the makeup of the market, the propensity to consume. I think those things kind of are balanced vis-a-vis the politics that sort of come through every now and then.
Cool. Thank you so much.
We're looking for Bianca.
Yes, that's a lot for me to learn. I guess that was my sort of more pressing question, that I suppose differentiation in the market. That was the first thing I felt like I need to learn in moving here. So thank you so much.
And good to have you in APAC.
Yes, I'm excited to be home.
Great, thanks, Bianca. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up and stop. Thank you so much, Minette and Joan, for your time today. We really appreciate it, and the insights. Super helpful for the Startup Grind community. Just some housekeeping notes. We will have a recording of this up on the Startup Grind Singapore page and YouTube, the Startup Grind local YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to go back and listen to various parts of the discussion, you'll be able to do that pretty quickly once we get it up. I also want to thank Paula. Paula is, I don't know if she's still on, Paula Bernasor. Yep, she's still there. She's the Cebu chapter director. We just want to thank the Cebu chapter for giving their support, and also to Fabian Martin from the Chengdu chapter and Paris chapter, Yingzi, who's there as well. They help promote the event to bring people in from all over the world. So, it's truly a global community that we have here at Startup Grind. So just want to thank everyone for your time. Minette and Joan, thank you so much for your insights today. And do come back and join us again at Startup Grind soon.